It's Wednesday, August 26. This is the news on PBCJ. I'm Carol Francis. The island recorded 3 COVID-19 related deaths on Tuesday, bringing the death toll to 19. The deceased are a 76-year-old female from St. Catherine, a 70-year-old male, and an 89-year-old female from Kingston and St. Andrew. We get more in this report from Marlon Samuels.
The country also recorded 120 new confirmed COVID-19 cases on Tuesday. These bring the total cases on record for the island to 1,732. Recoveries increased by 21, bringing total recoveries to 840. Of the newly confirmed cases, 61 are males and 59 females. They range in age from 2 to 91 years. The breakdowns of the cases are as follows: 72 in St. Catherine, 23 in Kingston and St. Andrew, 15 in Portland, 5 in St. Thomas, 1 in Clarendon, 1 in Trelawney, 2 in St. Anne, and 1 in St. Mary. 2 cases are contacts of confirmed cases. 118 are currently under investigation. 5 moderately ill patients and 3 critically ill patients are among the 801 active cases now under observation in Jamaica. 71 of the cases recorded on the island have returned to their country of origin. Some 29,560 people of interest are quarantined at home. 18 remain in quarantine at a government facility. For the news on PBCJ, I am Marlon Samuels.
In a bid to limit movement and therefore the spread of the COVID-19 virus, the government will not be granting permits for parties and other amusement events for the next 2 weeks. Prime Minister Andrew Holness spoke to this at a virtual press brief on Monday.
We will prohibit the granting of license and approvals for any parties or amusement or any such thing for the next 2-week period. So the Minister of Local Government will give further details on that.
Mr. Holness said the government will also be increasing its enforcement measures for those who breach health protocols designed to stem the spread of the coronavirus COVID-19.
The Commissioner of Police informed us that over 1,000 persons have been charged and prosecuted under the Disaster Risk Management Act relating to the measures put in place for COVID-19. So we have been prosecuting persons. We haven't made too much of it. We haven't gone out to publicize it because the intention is not to stigmatize. But more and more, it would appear that more needs to be made of it, that the public needs to know that we are serious about this and we are prosecuting persons. So we intend to increase significantly the level of enforcement and prosecution, particularly for persons who have been allowed to enter the island and who are not maintaining the quarantine. It's very difficult. We have the number, I'm told today, we have under home quarantine is 29,724. That would take the entire police force to police every single one. But the point of fact is that we have now said to the Commissioner of Police that all the stations around Jamaica should now make it a point of duty to visit the homes of persons under quarantine to ensure that they are there, and if they are not there, then they would be up for prosecution.
The National Water Commission NWC says citizens should still adhere to the water use prohibition order despite the increase in water levels at the two major catchment systems in the corporate area. Corporate Public Relations Manager at the NWC, Andrew Cannon, says these systems remain far below optimum levels despite the moderate improvements as a result of the torrential rains that have been impacting the island. Mr. Cannon says that under the prohibition order, water must be used for essential purposes only. A breach of the order can lead to persons being arrested and charged. The Hermitage Dam, which was at 38% of its capacity on Friday, August 21, is now at 53.2%. The Mona Reservoir is now at 33% of its capacity, which represents a slight rise from last Friday's 28.9%. Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clark says the government will be providing $3 billion to support small farmers and fishermen.
We will be providing $1 billion of support to farmers and fishermen for each of the next 3 years. That's $3 billion of support to small farmers and fishermen to ensure that the rural economy is maintained and that rural development continues even in spite of this pandemic. We will provide $10 billion of loan guarantee support to small and medium-sized enterprises through the Development Bank of Jamaica. By providing $10 billion of loan guarantee support, we will ensure that the productive capacity of our thousands of small and medium-sized businesses is maintained throughout this crisis.
Dr. Clark was speaking in his ministerial capacity at the Jamaica Labour Party's Belmont Road headquarters on Tuesday. Commuters are being urged to keep their face masks on while on buses. That word of caution from the Jamaica Urban Transit Company, JUTC. Corporate Communications Manager at the bus company, Cecil Toms, says it is mandatory for passengers to wear masks before they can board the buses. Passengers have reportedly been urged not to remove their masks during the journey, as some have been seen removing their masks to talk with other passengers on the buses. The JUTC says the practice of removing the masks must stop to ensure the safety of all passengers. According to Mr. Toms, the company has stepped up its sanitization activities to prevent the spread of COVID-19. The Victoria Mutual Group has temporarily closed its New Kingston branch of the Victoria Mutual Building Society after an employee tested positive for COVID-19. In a brief statement, the group said the branch will be deep cleaned and sanitized and is being guided by the Ministry of Health and Wellness in regards to safety protocols. The National Gallery of Jamaica has postponed its new flagship exhibition, the Kingston Biennial, until December 5, 2021. The move, it said, is due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The exhibition was previously scheduled to open on December 13, 2020. There was an earthquake across Jamaica shortly after 7 Wednesday morning. The quake was reportedly felt in Kingston and St. Andrew, St. Catherine, St. James, St. Elizabeth, St. Anne, Westmoreland, Manchester, and Clarendon. And time now for the business report for the latest foreign exchange prices and other market news.
In Tuesday's trading session, the JSE combined index declined by 5,892 points to close at just under 4,000 units. Overall market activity resulted from trading in 76 stocks, of which 27 advanced, 40 declined, and 19 traded firm. The junior market index advanced by 10 points to close at just under 3,000 units. Stocks advanced for 1834 Investments Limited, Access Financial Services, and Berger Paints Jamaica. Stocks declined for 138 Student Living Jamaica, AMG Packaging and Paper Company, and Beretta Investments Limited. Trading firm were Caribbean Assurance Brokers Limited, Community and Workers of Jamaica Deferred Share, and Dolphin Cove Limited. Carreras Limited was the volume leader with close to 5 million units, followed by Wigton Wind Farm Limited ordinary shares with over 2.9 million units and Grace Kennedy Limited with 2.7 million units. Now for the foreign exchange. The US dollar on Tuesday, August 25, ended trading at $150.77. The Canadian dollar sold for an average $114.07. The pound sterling traded at $196.26, and the euro ended trading at $180.46. Oil held near $46 a barrel on Wednesday, close to its highest since March, lifted by U.S. producers shutting most of their offshore Gulf of Mexico output ahead of Hurricane Laura, and a report showing a drop in U.S. crude inventories. Brent crude futures slipped 14 cents to $45.72 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate crude futures fell 17 cents to $43.18 a barrel. That's it for the Business Report on PBCJ. I'm Simone Absalom reporting on behalf of Gabriel Thompson.
Genital herpes is a common sexually transmitted disease that any sexually active person can get. Most people with the virus don't have symptoms. Even without signs of the disease, herpes can still be spread to sex partners. In this week's edition of Living Healthy, Simone Absalom talks about the symptoms of herpes and treatment with obstetrician and gynecologist Dr. Rishi Chand.
Genital herpes is a common sexually transmitted infection caused by the herpes simplex virus.
Well, herpes has two main types. Herpes 1, which is usually an oral mucosa infection, and herpes 2, which is usually genital. However, they can cross-link depending on sexual practices.
When you talk about oral, what are some of the, be more specific, what happens with your mouth?
It's what we commonly call the cold sore, right? So it comes up as a blister. Usually when the person is under stress, if they're immunocompromised, which means their immune system is not working very well, they may tend to have breakouts. And subsequent presentations tend to be milder and milder. Okay, but herpes, once contracted, is always in the system. And that has implications also, because in terms of the sexual partner, informing the partner, taking protection to prevent infection of the partner, and also in pregnancy. Very important in pregnancy, especially during the delivery process. If there is an active infection in the genital area, the fetus, the neonate, is at increased risk of contracting that virus. And the sequelae can be very harmful. Brain problems, right? Meningitis, difficulties with vision and hearing and so on. So if that is present, the obstetrician is usually going to opt for a C-section delivery instead of a vaginal delivery to prevent that neonate from being exposed.
The outbreak for the pregnancy and otherwise can be internal, you're saying? Not just external, it can be internal.
No, I'm saying it's on the external vagina. Mm-hmm. So you don't want the fetus to pass through that environment. So that's why you may choose to deliver by C-section. Some doctors, or the recommended practice I should say, is within the last few weeks of the pregnancy, you could be put on prophylactic medication, which means you're trying to prevent an infection from happening around the time of the delivery.
Okay.
Now, if a woman contracts herpes for the first time during pregnancy, the sequelae or the consequences for the baby in terms of malformations, congenital problems is worse.
Wow. So how do you usually treat herpes?
Well, we treat the outbreaks, right? There are antiviral medications, both topical, which means a cream, or oral, a tablet form, to suppress that infection. But like I said, herpes is always going to be within the system. That individual is therefore predisposed to having outbreaks in the future.
All right, so how can you prevent contracting herpes?
Well, just like any other sexually transmitted infection with good sexual practices, using barrier contraception. Important point, if someone is taking the oral contraceptive pill, they in their minds might think their risk of getting pregnant, rightly so, is reduced. But they also have to consider the risk of infection, of which herpes is one. For a patient who has herpes, the risk of infection is increased when there's an active outbreak as opposed to when it is quiescent or quiet.
What if you have it and you don't get it treated? Is there additional risk to your body?
Like I said, once you have contracted it, it's going to be a lifelong situation. Most infections are self-limiting, which means within a specified number of days, usually 7 to 10 days, the body will recover, right? With or without treatment. So to answer the question, I don't think it's going to be worse if it wasn't treated. But most patients with an outbreak are usually likely to seek intervention.
See you next time for another informative report on Living Healthy.
In regional news, the Ministry of Tourism in Barbados is embarking on a campaign to help struggling business in the sector rebound from the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have more in this report.
The Ministry of Tourism is embarking on a campaign to help struggling businesses in the sector rebound from the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. The initiative, dubbed Barbados I Come From, seeks to encourage more locals to visit attractions, restaurants and hotels and to take part in other tourism-related activities. Minister of Tourism Lisa Cummins spoke about the marketing campaign yesterday following a tour of Andromeda Botanical Gardens and other establishments in Bathsheba, St. Joseph, with other ministry officials and members of the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc.
As you know, COVID has slowed down the movement of international travel and has allowed us to be in a position where now many of our attractions are not at full capacity. And we have always been dependent very heavily on visitor traffic coming to the majority of our attractions. And we want to make sure that we're able to keep these businesses afloat, to keep Barbadians employed in these companies. And so the next few months will see us on the road every week. We're going to be meeting on the ground and in the communities with all of the attractions, with all of the entities, for example, that you see on Barbados in a nutshell and all of the key advertising platforms. But we're also going to be meeting with small shops and small persons who are inside the community, for example, who are landmarks for tourists, but not necessarily for Barbadians. And so, as Marsha indicated just now, we are going to be kicking off a domestic tourism initiative as well, where we're going to be getting the tourism workers, for example, who are the front line of selling the tourism product, but who are at home now while they're awaiting their properties and their businesses to reopen. We're getting them back out into the market.
In addition, the tourism minister hinted at technical assistance for restaurants, attractions, and other tourism industry spaces that have not been able to withstand the crisis.
Of course, of the last 4, 5, 6, 7 months now, you have had some businesses that responded to the lockdowns and the closures very differently. There are some businesses that have been able to weather the storms. There are some businesses that remain open. There are some businesses that are at 30%, 10%, 15% capacity. And we have to consider the impact that will have socially and on the financial well-being of those persons who are employed there. So it's not a single issue, Marlon, in fairness. It is a significant issue that has multiple levels of repercussions and implications that we have to look at comprehensively.
And you mentioned linkages. I didn't hear you mention about the restaurants, for example.
We're seeing them too. We're seeing the restaurants as well. We're going out to the restaurants. We're actually going to be working with, PS has been leading the charge in reaching out to all of the stakeholders to ensure that we're able not just to meet with them, but to be able to offer solutions. So we are meeting with the various economic advisory teams. We're meeting with the development teams, the business development teams. We are refashioning within the ministry one of the existing commissions to focus on business continuity and business development to give them empowerment support. And we're working with the various line ministries as well to see what measures are available to support them.
Representatives of the Childcare Providers Association of Trinidad and Tobago are calling on the government to provide assistance during the COVID-19 emergency period. The association, which represents daycare providers and a number of private preschoolers, say many of their members' businesses have folded or are on the verge of collapse.
It's been 5 months since the COVID-19 pandemic has forced the closure of schools and daycare facilities across the country. With the closure of these facilities came harsh reality checks for many citizens, among them private childcare providers who, along with their employees, remain without the means to support themselves and their families. Now that the little ones who are usually left in their care remain at home with either parents or guardians, the Private Childcare Providers Association of Trinidad and Tobago is calling on government to assist in their time of need. President of the association, Nisha Hoyt, told TTT News she respects government's decisions and their intentions to keep the nation's children safe. But in the meantime, overheads remain and bills are left unpaid.
And some people have lost their businesses in terms of having to close down because their landlords cannot keep them there any longer without paying rent. Every day you look on social media, you see people selling out their furniture and equipment from their schools and their preschools and daycares.
The association's president said members would like the opportunity to access loans and other services so they can at least save their businesses and survive.
So I believe that there should have been some sort of grant or loan that would have been offered to us as a community so that we can be able to sustain ourselves. And again, if the government cannot afford to give us a grant, we should have the opportunity to at least get a loan that we would be able to pay back, just as in the SME loan after 2 years.
In the meantime, the association's treasurer, Lauren Busby, said parents remain worried these facilities will all be forced to close permanently, leaving them without an option if and when things change.
The concern is, are we going to be there at that time when they need us? Because a lot of us are uncertain and unsure we will be able to hold on to the facilities.
The childcare providers remain hopeful their situation is addressed sometime soon. Crystal Wilson, TTT News.
The election returning officer for Region 4 in Guyana, Claremont Mingo, has been arrested by the country's Criminal Investigations Department. The arrest is part of their investigations into alleged fraud surrounding the March 2 general and regional elections.
Crime Chief Wendell Blanham confirmed Mr. Mingo's arrest, but would offer no other detail. The arrest of Mingo comes just 4 days after the Guyana Police Force announced that it was launching a comprehensive investigation into reports of electoral fraud, as advised by the Director of Public Prosecutions and the force's legal advisor. A private criminal charge had been filed against the Region 4 returning officer back in March by PPP member Charles Ramson Jr., who is now the Minister of Culture, Youth and Sport. The charge was in relation to the first declaration of the election results for Region 4 made by Mingo. That first declaration of incorrect numbers led to the High Court ordering Mingo to tally over the votes and do it in front of the party representatives. But Mingo's new numbers again raised concerns based on the statements of poll that the People's Progressive Party made public. Mr. Mingo refused to change the numbers again and made a declaration. That declaration led to a political standoff, which resulted in a national recount of all votes cast in the elections. The recount took more than a month, and the recount of Region 4 votes showed that although the APNU-AFC won the region, the margin in Mingo's declarations was far more than the recounted figure. Mingo was not part of the recount, and it was the recount numbers that were used to declare the final results of the elections and resulted in a change in government. Had the Mingo declarations been used, there might have been a re-election. The national recount also found a series of anomalies in other parts of Region 4, which the APNU-AFC intends to use for its election petition case, since the coalition believes the anomalies were enough to change the outcome of the elections. Despite his name being thrust into the spotlight and him being highlighted in the various election observer reports, Mingo has remained silent. With his arrest today, he is expected to be questioned about the alleged fraud in the 2020 elections. The new government has already indicated that it intends to set up a commission of inquiry to examine the 2020 elections and all that took place.
And time for sports. The World Football governing body FIFA has relaxed the rules on the release of players for the upcoming international window in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Clubs are usually obliged to release players to national teams during those parts of the calendar year reserved for international games. However, quarantine rules in many countries will make travel impractical. FIFA notes that the ruling applies to the men's international window from August 31 to September 8 and the women's window from September 14 to 22. FIFA has already decided that international matches in those slots can only take place in Europe. And that's our package. Join us again tomorrow, same time, same place for more news and sports right here on PBCJ, the People's Station.